one.
Good afternoon, shut-ins.
Yo.
This is the first time that we are. This is the first time that we are going live in the afternoon. We appreciate you guys joining us. This is a second time because we announced a contest once, right, in the afternoon. Was that it? Anyway, we're super excited to be back. We let you guys know this morning that we were going to be coming back. Really special show today. So the CCC had, which is the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, had their Thursday meeting today. It was an important meeting, and so we decided now that, and that meeting ran a bit long, but now that that meeting is over, we actually have a number of special guests with us here on the show today, and let's bring them on. So we actually have Shaleen Title, we have Grant Smith, and Chauncy Spenser. Welcome, everyone. And starting with Shaleen, if you guys could introduce yourselves, we'd appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for being so flexible with the timing. I just got out of a 4.5-hour meeting. I sit on the social justice seat of the Cannabis Control Commission. Before that, about 15 years as an activist for legalization and social equity. I was also a lawyer in the industry, and I ran a recruiting firm. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Go ahead, and Grant.
Oh, hello. My name's Grant Smith. I am a disabled cannabis patient and an activist for social equity, patient rights, grassroots causes, basically, as they come up. I also do some cannabis reporting with the Young Jurks, which you can find on Facebook or on Anchor, Stitcher, Last.fm, Spotify, etc. And I also occasionally write for midnightmass.substack.com and Dig Boston, mostly covering grassroots cannabis activism and the interplay between that work and the regulatory and legislative apparatus in the Commonwealth.
Excellent. And Chauncy?
And my name is Chauncy Spenser. I'm an economic empowerment applicant trying to open a dispensary and cultivation facility in Boston, Mattapan, called the 420. And before that, I was a lab technician working at Dana-Farber for a number of years. And right now, I'm a father of 3, pushing a lift car around in the pandemic era.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate all of you joining us today. Grant, could you do us a favor? I know that you were keeping close tabs on the meeting today, the Thursday meeting. Could you give us a recap of what went on today?
Yeah, sure. So there was a lot of really important developments that happened during today's meeting. I can't touch on all of them, but quickly, a very important update provided by the Commission was with regards to services for existing businesses, not services, but some type of service the Commission could provide to those applicants. That initial piece of the puzzle was allowing licensees whose license runs up in the next 60 days to have an extra 60 days to renew their license. So that was one big piece of the puzzle. Another discussion that happened was regarding delivery licenses and pre-certification for those delivery licenses. And what that means is pre-certification is a way for the Commission to streamline the application process for delivery applicants in a way that sort of delegates it to the executive director of the Commission, so that when the Commission comes up to do its provisional license review of delivery applicants, they're farther along in the process. And so that was another topic discussed. And then the big topic that's been discussed in the grassroots community that was addressed at the meeting today was a email that went out on April 17th of this year, so a few weeks ago, to economic empowerment and social equity applicants. Now, as part of this email, attached to it was a interpretation of a regulatory policy by Cannabis Control Commission staff. And that interpretation told economic empowerment applicants that they could have 10% ownership in their companies and maintain the benefits of their equity priority with that 10% ownership. Now, this caused a lot of confusion because many applicants both felt that there was an existing 51% ownership requirement for that status. And even if there wasn't, that there should be a 51% ownership. And so what that led to was a bit of confusion as to whether this was the letter sent by commission staff on April 17th was a clarification of a policy, a creation of a new policy, an interpretation of a policy. And as a result, today the commission took up a discussion of that April 17th directive. And basically, the context here was that when the Economic Empowerment Program first started in the spring of 2018, there was no ongoing ownership requirement originally to maintain one's EE status. And however, back in April 2018, there was also only one benefit of EE status, which was application priority review. And then in the fall of 2019, the CCC regulations were updated to expand benefits for EE and SE applicants, giving them things like access to a 2-year priority period for delivery licenses and things like that. At that point, there was an ongoing ownership requirement implemented in the regulations that does require 51% ownership to benefit from that EE status. And so with that context in mind, what the commission did today was, by a 5-0 vote, they issued an order to the executive director directing him to issue a revised guidance to economic empowerment and social equity applicants, letting them know that the 10% ownership requirement was sent out in error, and that the existing regulations mandate a 51% ownership requirement. However, because this is so nuanced and so complex, I actually wanted to ask Commissioner Title if my read of that very in-depth discussion, which Commissioner Title was directly involved in, was correct.
Yeah, that's basically correct. You can call me Shaleen, by the way. Done 5 hours of being a commissioner was enough for today. If you would like, I can recap a bit more.
Please.
So on that particular topic, would you like that? Okay. So I mean, for me, the bottom line is that we admitted that we messed up because we should not have allowed this change to be made without commission level, meaning public discussion and an opportunity to comment, even if it is warranted, and I think it is, to have a discussion about perhaps revising the ownership threshold. So what we did today was we essentially reversed that decision. We came away clearly. Clearly, the rule is to qualify for any economic empowerment related benefits, an entity has to be majority owned by economic empowerment applicants, which is how I kind of always interpreted the regulations, and I believe my colleagues did as well. So there will be a revised letter that goes out that makes that clear. But then we also do want to properly have the discussion about whether perhaps 51% ownership should be revised. Maybe somewhere between 10 and 51% is the right number. We will definitely invite economic empowerment applicants who have been very vocal, very engaged so far. I hope you can see today that your involvement in the process definitely made a difference. For me, I can say when I started getting questions like, how was this decision made? What data was used? Where's the transparency here? It was immediately clear that we needed to reverse that, and because we couldn't answer those questions. And I think my colleagues felt the same way. But I do also just want to hear, because everybody's in a different situation, if you feel like it would be useful for you, especially in these circumstances today, if you would be able to get benefits for an entity with perhaps a bit less than 51%, I'm very interested in hearing that perspective as well. But as of today, we reversed that decision.
That's dead on the money. And Michael, I don't mean to ask a question here, but Chauncy, as an economic empowerment applicant yourself, where did you fall on this whole debate? Do you favor 51% ownership? And if so, why for equity status?
Oh, well, I've always been trying to, as an economic empowerment applicant, courting investors um, your position of power is kind of um, is you're constantly under pressure, and so folks are always trying to come in and skirt underneath the regulations. And we've been hearing about these ownership limits. We've been hearing about ownership limits that investors are trying to get in under, whether it be uh, putting people on your board, controlling your how much you can pay yourself or pay your employees, just overall control. And so it's very your position is very weak. And the only thing that we had to fight against that pressure of money controlling your business was that 51% limit. And that's the starting point. With these negotiations, they make, if you're lucky, you might get a predator who comes in and says, yeah, it's 51% on paper, however, we're going to supply you with 80% of your product, and it's going to come from us. And they're going to charge management fees and all these other things. So by the end of the day, your 51% is really not 51%. You don't really have that control that you think that you should have. And so hearing this change, it came to me, early in the morning. I think it was like Sunday or something like that. I guess it was posted on another page, and another EE called me. It was Amini Gardner. She had called me and said, did you see this? And she told me, I just woke up listening to it. I was like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, why were we told? And then it took an entire day for me to really process the impact of it. And so, of course, I began to become angry, at the consequences of this, because they're felt downstream. Although it's just one line in the paper, it causes so much. It changes the floor of your negotiating from 51% to 10% right off, just by changing that wiggle room. It's not really wiggle room. It really isn't. It's not a spectrum when you're negotiating with these folks. They come in and they're just saying, 51% and 5% management fees and control and such, and you're going to buy this, and this is how much you're going to pay. So just now, if you have that 10% wiggle room, it drops immediately. They come in at 10% and say, yeah, we're going to have 90% control, and we'll sell the company as we see fit, and we'll do what we want to do. So,
Chauncy, am I hearing you correctly that what you're basically saying is that allowing for equity status to benefit a company that's only 10% owned by an EE causes a race to the bottom, in the sense that investors will say to you, EE who wants to retain majority ownership, why would I bother investing in you when I can go to another EE or SE who will give me 90% and let me benefit from their equity priority? Am I hearing that correct?
Absolutely. And when all those cohorts come in, and they may not be, privy to this environment that we've been operating in for 2 years, I'll hear them. They'll say, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. As long as I get my foot in the door. However, economic empowerment is a program that is designed to provide us with dignity and ownership for our a community that has been impacted by the war on drugs. So there it shifts the capital. You can hear it just be sucked right out of the community. And so other folks may be taking predator of their lack of experience navigating the environment. So as more social equity folks come in, then they may have the opportunity to negotiate at 10%. It just becomes incredibly unfair. It's just like a larger pool for investors to choose alternatives from. And then you as an EE is just sitting there with your, I got my 51%, but no, this is impossible to court them, compared to the 90% ownership.
Maybe Maybe I can ask a question of Commissioner Title, because I think you're driving at some of the tension here that made this such a tough decision, a fait accompli, perhaps, which was that Commissioner Shaleen, during the meeting today, Chairman Hoffman was hinting at sort of the devil's advocate position, which is flexibility for applicants who face fundraising barriers, as you, I'm sure, are all too acutely aware, along with municipal barriers. And Chauncy, I know you're very aware of those municipal barriers. So, Shaleen, the devil's advocate position, that it gives more flexibility to applicants. How do you approach weighing those two competing sort of interests, the applicant who's worried about a race to the bottom and the applicant who wants enough flexibility in their investment structure to survive?
That's a great question. So first, I just want to make sure that we're being clear that all of this discussion today has to do with economic empowerment applicants, whereas a social equity program is something separate that we did not address today. And part of the reason why we get so confused collectively about economic empowerment priority is that under the law, it was meant to be something really specific. There were only 2 weeks specified under statute during which we could certify applicants as economic empowerment priority. And then they were meant to be reviewed first so that they could get a head start in time. And I think certain other agencies might have seen that the applications didn't come in and say, oh, well, we did what we were supposed to do under the law. They didn't apply, we're done here. But that really does not respect the spirit of the law, which was that we were supposed to be encouraging these applicants. But they're two separate groups. Social equity program participants are directly affected, disproportionately harm people. Economic empowerment applicants have shown through their application that they would economically empower those communities. So two separate things. Now, when it comes to economic empowerment applicants, we've had to evolve along the way and say, okay, they didn't get that head start, so what other benefits are we going to give them? Exclusive access to delivery is one, waived fees is another. The main one is, of course, prioritized review. We've gotten some great testimony. You mentioned Amanique. She testified about technical assistance at our applicant forum. And we are looking into getting that from law school, clinics, or other vendors, perhaps. I think that's a very good benefit. So that definition is evolving. When it comes to how we are flexible about the ownership threshold, it's a very good question that we've been struggling with since day one, because you have to strike a balance between treating a business owner who's benefiting under these programs with the same independence as any other business owner, where you don't want them to be, 100 years from now not having been able to sell their business, and cash out the way that any other business owner might have. We want to balance that with also saying we don't want groups who are not intended to benefit from these programs to be benefiting from them, because that doesn't make sense. So in striking that balance, we have to consider both ownership and control, which are totally separate things. Not totally separate things, related, of course, but you can be a majority control. You could have majority control without necessarily having majority ownership, and vice versa. If you've watched our meetings that we've had recently, where we have had to stop certain entities from controlling more than 3 licenses in violation of the law, you've seen us talk about things like who controls who's on your board. That was the one that ended up being what the discussion hinged on at our last meeting, but various other factors in our regulations that may constitute control regardless of what the written ownership is. I will say these past 3 years, I would say I've had a pretty purist view, which is I have not really wanted to compromise in terms of requiring majority ownership and control, But given the COVID-19 crisis, given the way that the governor has made decisions that I think are not fair to small businesses, forcing them to shut down for longer periods, I'm more open to the idea of being flexible for people who want to use their benefits, but perhaps not be a majority owner. That said, 10% is a really low number. And I mean, I'm sure I had the same reaction as many of you when I heard the number 10%. I was like, where the hell did that come from? That's so low. So I think that given proper feedback and input, like we should have had from the beginning, and really hearing about what current circumstances are now with this crisis, that we can come up with the right answer where it may not necessarily be 51%, but perhaps it's a good amount of ownership and perhaps majority control. But I think we can get to that balance.
Somebody in the comments had mentioned other ways that EE applicants could get taken advantage of, like management fees, shelving fees, and other sort of agreements that somehow, sort of slip aside, or underneath the radar of actual equity. Is that something? Is it just sort of like buyer beware at this point, or is there, or maybe is there even a way that EE applicants can get a resource or guidance, around maybe what might be potentially predatory agreements that people are proposing to them?
Yeah. So the thing about predatory arrangements is we'll keep changing the rules. They'll keep trying something new. That's kind of the nature of it. So you've seen every time we've changed regulations that they've gotten more specific about ownership and control, but we'll always need to be addressing whatever the new techniques are. I will say I'm pretty familiar with management contracts and shelf space, et cetera, because even back in the DPH medical program only days, those businesses had to technically be nonprofit. And so you would have to find a way to be nonprofit, but also, be sending your revenue back, to your investors, and to do so in a way that is technically legal. So those things are not new to regulators or to this industry in Massachusetts, but as new predatory ways of trying to get control come up, the more we know about it, the better, because then we can address it. And you can see with the investigations we've had with some of these big entities that we put in a lot of resources and significant time into investigating these arrangements and unrolling them and making sure that we're enforcing our ownership and control limitations. So what I would say to people is, if you are in negotiations and you're being approached and you have concerns about predatory relationship or what you're being approached with, definitely tell us, because we can take that into account.
And we must also bring up the fact that a lot of these negotiations are happening pre-HCA. And the powers that be already have ins on HCAs, and they're often political actors, or they have inroads to moving the process through the municipal level. And that's where the vast majority of us are at, is the municipal level. And very rarely do, and I say us, I mean Black entrepreneurs in this space, because I think that's often lost. That the racial aspect of it is often lost in the whole discussions about economic empowerment. So I just want to say that there we don't have that political power to negotiate these things with these characters who stymie us at every single level. And whether it be in the city council or in the mayor's office or whatever. So our negotiating abilities are limited, and so we need those loans that the commissioner had been speaking of. And so before we start talking about selling off our equity, I think those loans would be something that we should be focusing on, if those loans are going to come down the pike at some point, then maybe we can wait for that before we start having those conversations about diluting our equity.
This would probably be a good time to talk about bills that have been introduced addressing these things. So I don't have the numbers offhand. Maybe some of you do, but the recommendation that our chairman and executive director made in a letter, I think it was about 3 months ago now, was that we need to address three things, and loans is one of them. And we now have a state, Illinois, that has created a loan fund, so we have a model to look at. The second is that Chauncey's absolutely right. Municipalities have no obligation whatsoever under the law to act equitable in any way. And for us as a state to be required to only give licenses to applicants who have an HCA creates a catch-22 impossible situation. And so municipalities need to be, in my opinion, subjected to the same equity mandates that the state is. So there's some consistency there. And then the third one was grants, municipal equity, and then codifying the social equity program, because as of now, it's just a very vague need to promote and encourage disproportionately harmed communities. But I think we need to have codified programs and dedicated funding so that no matter who the commissioners are in the future, no matter what happens, that program will be safe. One last thing about the racial makeup of disproportionately harmed people not being explicitly addressed. One reason for that is in Ohio, there were explicit quotas for minorities. 15% of licenses went to people of color, and that was struck down as unconstitutional. And so our basis is people who have been disproportionately harmed as evidenced by residency in areas of high arrests and drug convictions, or spouses or parents with drug convictions. And that has led to the same population. So if you look at the statistics that we've released about our equity program participants, I think it does fairly represent disproportionately harmed communities, but that's why we don't explicitly mention race.
Yeah, I just my concerns were just that we operate in an environment that doesn't allow for a lot of self-determination. So we are still victims to the powers that be, and so that's the only reason why I brought that up, because that's a very that context needs to be considered any time that regulations are passed. And so to allow for such a wiggle room is a spectrum from 51 to 10 almost certainly codifies the predatory loans that we've been dealing with for the past 2 years.
I just wanted to jump in before we transition too much to say that I absolutely agree that I think part of the insight is that the solution to the equity or undercapitalization problem does not per se have to be in the form of finance capital, because that social equity loan fund is viable. It's been discussed first as a budget amendment last year and now as a bill. And Senator Sonia Chang Diaz is running point on that bill that does more than just codify the loan fund. So hopefully we'll be able to follow up with that bill number. And the one point I wanted to make is that I think what gets so hard sometimes for people to parse is that the interests of a given applicant, SE, EE, etc., is not per se going to be the same interest as the structure of the equity program or the application program. And it's for that reason that people who are applicants or cannabis business owners cannot be commissioners, because you cannot regulate and own a business together. It's an inherent conflict of interest. So I think that's partially why this can, and this is what I really wanted to hit on, this can be such an emotionally passionate subject for so many people because it hits on their livelihoods. And one thing that I saw over the past week, even between people who were disagreeing about this 51 versus 10% issue in good faith, was a lot of anger. And I don't know the solution to bridge that gap. And I don't have even a semblance of a proposal to start that process. But I do know that fundamentally, that's the insight I try to come back to sometimes with people who get a little bit too angry about things, which is that you may have a vision for your company that works best for you. And you may think that not being allowed to do that is somehow an attack on you. But the reality is that what you're allowed to do is going to impact people for decades and millennia potentially to come. So obviously, I'm not talking to you, Chauncy. I'm talking to anyone out there who gets passionate about these issues and may be inclined to start attacking others or anything like that. I beg of you, please, please remember that we're just human beings and we all are stakeholders in this, whether it's from the public policy perspective, the regulatory perspective, the applicant perspective, the media perspective. And that human interaction, I think, even though I said I didn't have an answer, is the beginning of the turnkey to sort of solve the issue. And that perhaps brings us back, which is an interesting facet of this, which is I kind of heard Shaleen saying in the beginning that there was a little bit of a failure in the consultation process. And I fundamentally believe that the enabling condition of legitimate representative democracy is a decent consultation hierarchy. I got that from John Rawls, by the way, in his famed treatise, Political Liberalism from 1989. But yes, so I believe that that consultation process is fundamental to legitimate democracy. And if we find a weakness in that consultation process, we can at least begin exploring how to solve those issues. And that's, I think, not only what we did here today, but what occurred over this past week. And that part gives me a lot of hope.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Transparency and stability is another thing, and so at the start of the process, we thought we had one thing and these things weren't delivered, and it caused a lot of frustration, to a lot of people, right? And, but the economic empowerment program takes all kinds, right? Some people are, and I'm very critical of a lot of the folks in the program. And so, I don't bite my tongue, I don't have to, what I mean? Like, I just don't have to. I'm not in that position where I have to. So I will say, this is what it was intended to do. And these people were screwed, and a lot of people were screwed. And this whole endeavor is going to, could possibly be written. And so who are we to, and I say we, generally speaking, who are we as folks who largely, from what I can tell, are not operating in that space, who are not selling cannabis, who are not using it to live, who are not using for medical reasons, trying to displace job opportunities, or money, people's income, and think that you have the right to do it. There's a way in which you're going to do it. You're going to do it right. And you're going to respect the people who were here before and all the suffering that has occurred before that. And not just going to come willy-nilly and shape regulations and policies behind closed doors and then think that everything's going to be okay. So, we have to beat that back because we've seen so much capital be, pulled out of our community, lost in so many different ways, whether it be from, the mismanagement of the GI Bill to redlining or the financial collapse. I've seen it so many times. I'm over it. And so I don't care what color they are. They're not going to come in here and start pretending as if they are going to repeat past wrongs. I see it coming in my way. But anyhow, that's my big tangent. So forgive me. So I can get animated about it, and I can, and hopefully I don't sound hyperbolic when I do speak, but I believe what I believe, and I said what I said.
Well, I think we always appreciate the fact that you're vocal and outspoken, and you wear your heart on your sleeve a lot of times, Chauncey. Chauncey,
Oh, couldn't tell.
yeah. So Chauncey, one thing I guess, and I know that this isn't maybe directly related to today's meeting, but there's a lot of EE applicants that I think are still stuck in other parts of the process. And so, I know that that's been a fight that you've been fighting now for a couple of years. And I know when we had you on the show maybe like a month ago, we asked sort of like, what can we do to help? Because I know it's one thing to sort of talk about the problem, but and I think yours is probably maybe not exactly like, but there's a lot of folks that just have difficulty even navigating through the HCA process or even getting to that point. And so at least from your standpoint, Chauncey, like, what can we do to help you out and folks like you that are having difficulty navigating the municipalities?
Hmm. Um, well, interestingly enough, the city in which I'm trying to open up, they did something interesting. Although I have my issues with how they did it and some of the finer points, which are very important. They created a board, redundancy. As I see it, it's another cannabis commission, mini cannabis commission, right? So, and it requires political input. And that's the last thing we need is more political input, more shenanigans, because that's where it happens, right? And so anything, like if you're out there and you're trying to shape policy and you're trying to get the ball moving in your city, whatever you got to do is try to figure out a way to make it a standard form that does not require political influence, because I tell you right now, they got their hands in the pot. Their friends, whomever, they're at it. They're causing problems, and so whatever you can do to create a policy that removes their influence, then that's what's best. Because I believe that a lot of cities are now starting to gear up and create their own social equity and programs that recognize economic empowerment folks. So be active. Call them out when they're doing wrong, and that should be at least a start. But I think I see Grant. You wanted to comment because Grant always has suggestions. Let Grant
No, I want to jump in here because I think I have a little bit more leeway on the municipal equity as to what I can say, in the sense that you're talking about Cambridge. And what Cambridge did was, in my opinion, a model that could be replicated across the Commonwealth in every single city and town that allows legal cannabis. As we know, it's allowed in 156 to 160 or so of the cities and towns. You can visit the CCC's website and check out their municipal equity tracker that Kay Doyle developed if you'd like to learn more about which cities and towns facilitate what type of licensing. And as a matter of, to tie it into your comment, what makes that such an awesome resource is those vested fiscal interests used to prey on the fact that there was no ability for people to find out on a town by town level what the licensing structure was like. But Cambridge, they created a 2-year municipal equity period during which only state certified economic empowerment, along with a few other categories of licensees, could obtain a host community agreement in Cambridge for 2 years. And what happened? A medical dispensary owned by some white conservatives from Andover, yep, I really went there, they sued in order to undermine that period because they didn't get included. And that's the type of entrenched fiscal interest that undermines public policy in the pursuit of their own financial interest in a way that I find to be abhorrent. And if you come into this arena and try to advance your fiscal interests by undermining legitimate public policy, I won't hesitate to call you out on it. And I know some people have to be reserved about this because of their overlapping societal connections and etc. But for me, it's a clear-cut question. If you undermine the public good to advance your own personal profit, you absolutely disgrace everything that makes this democracy beautiful. I don't agree with Alexander Hamilton. I don't agree with these modern predatory financial capitalists. The point of public policy is to engender the public good. And if the public good butts up against your private profit and you sue to undermine that public good, you disgust me. I'm sorry. I normally don't get so passionate. It's been a very riled up day for me. And thank you for allowing me to go on that montage, because what I wanted to say there is that rather than companies suing to undermine programs like the one created in Cambridge, every one of those companies should be celebrating it. Competition, not regulatory capture. The actual free market, not using corrupt influence to get you and your friends licenses while everyone else goes bankrupt. That's what America is about. And if you feel differently, go sign a contract with Tilt.
Well, they need to capture they need to do regulatory capture because they want to sell trash cannabis. They don't know how to grow it, and that's the only way it's going to move off their shelves. But I don't know. I'm sorry. That's my opinion of things.
Yes, that was only my opinion as well. I apologize. I was not making an official statement of fact. Well, thank you. That was extremely intense, and I'm glad I was able to get that out in a way that reflected, I think, what makes this entire arena so important, which is that we are the front lines in warding off nefarious malfeasance, which is the corruption you're talking about. And the minute that folks like us start looking the other way, we've completely lost the republic. We've probably already lost the republic, all things considered, but the very, very small sliver of it left is manifest in folks like yourself, Chauncy, folks like you, Shaleen, folks like you, Eric and Mike, and I consider it an honor to call all of you my friends. So.
Well, we appreciate that, Grant. And Grant, you've got folks in the comments cheering you on as you've been going and mashing on the heart button as you've as you were telling everyone what's what. Grant, I think one reason why you specifically are actually so important in all of this is because as time goes on, there's folks like Chauncy that we're all hoping and waiting for his success to happen, and when that happens, it's not that Chauncy's passion around the issues wanes. It's more that Chauncy is suddenly very busy with life, with an ideally a successful licensed cannabis business, and even Shaleen as commissioner and other things between family life and future endeavors that could happen, and once we're no longer able to enjoy her as commissioner someday, it's tough, Grant, because the folks that are still available that are not only passionate about it but are also intelligent and can really do what you just did, which is to actually clearly and concisely set everyone straight in a couple of minutes and do so passionately and in a way that people are cheering you on. And there aren't enough people in our community like that, not because people's hearts aren't in the right place. It's really just the natural progression of most of the people that came together to fight are fighting for business, and sometimes it's for patient rights and it's for other stuff. But a lot of the people that come to fight for business, once they find their success, there isn't as much time for them to be coming and rallying and doing all of this stuff. And Chauncy, I'm not trying to say that you're going to be one of those folks. It's just we need. I am. There was one comment, and there's some comments that are going on right now that are talking about even non-EE applicants and just other folks that are in just the sort of general populace that was supposed to be helped out by the cannabis industry, the formulation of it, the profits that were coming from it, and the opportunities that could arise from that. And there's EE applicants, it's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart personally. But there's all of these other folks, right? And all of us, Grant and Chauncy, there's been times when I see you guys out there fighting for other groups, and you're fighting for their rights when in the long run elevating their rights actually marginalizes the EE, the power of the EE applicant, right? And so, Grant, I don't mean to go on about this, but Grant, it's so important. Like, you are actually, and Chauncey, you are too, because like you're fighting, you're you're the guy that hasn't given up, right? Like, you're the guy that continues to fight, and it's inspirational for a lot of folks that are in similar positions as you. Grant, you're so necessary for this industry, because there isn't anyone else out there like you who is actually doing it. Like, you're not making a dime out of this. There's nothing that you're fighting for yourself, other than patient rights, other than rights that you should have had, and we all should have had all along. But you continue to fight for EE applicants and for SE applicants and for vets and farmers and everyone else that comes to you looking for help. And I know that there's other people out there, and there needs to be other people out there. We need people of color who can step up and act in the same way, because we're even seeing right now comments like in this show where there's folks that are saying, like, who's out there representing the folks that were put in prison for 20 years? Like, where are those voices? When and how are they allowed to be heard? And who is actually out there trying to really help them, other than just simply maybe expunging records, which many would argue is actually a disservice to the 10, 20, 30 years of pain and suffering that people went through, to simply wipe those records out and say, hey, you're good now, like, get a move on. So, Grant,
those they don't intersect, like, so the folks who want to fight for records and fight for expungement, fight for traditional employment routes, absent the not in the cannabis industry, they don't touch cannabis. And so, I've made phone calls, others have made phone calls, Armonique and Goldie Piff, they've made phone calls. We've all tried to reach out to these groups that say they are for rectifying the harm, the war on drugs. However, cannabis is not something that they particularly want to be involved in. So we're losing a lot of important voices. And then on top of that, Boston is just a very unique place where a lot of our, say for instance with Black folks, we are typically educated at HBUs, which are down south, and a lot of folks just don't come back, because they don't like the political environment, the life here. There's so much more to offer, and as a Howard graduate and a Morehouse graduate, so we lose a lot of brain drain. So we don't have them rushing it, but we do have people. Don't get me wrong, we do have people here, but their interests are in real estate. Their original interests are real estate. Their original interests are more capitalistic, minded. So folks who come into the cannabis space, that's where they're coming from. And I argue with them all the time. Some put it up a front as if they're concerned about the war on drugs, but meanwhile they have that capitalistic mindset. And so that's what you got to battle up against. But again, the economic empowerment program takes all kinds, and cannabis industry takes all kinds, except the traditional market. Traditional market, actually, that does take all kinds too. But a very interesting group there too. But trying to create a robust industry needs to be the goal, where everyone can participate, everyone can have self-determination. Whether you want to be an employee or be an entrepreneur, a small entrepreneur with a delivery license, or something along those lines. That a real delivery license without cameras, but we'll go there. But anyhow, where we would have a far more robust industry where there are more actors, not concentrated within a dispensary, where all sales are just there, right? And it needs to be out in the community and more dynamic, so that's what my vision, my hopes, and what my observations are.
Can I pop in on something you said a little bit earlier, Michael? I agree with everything Chauncey said, but you talked a little bit, and I'm just a conduit. I don't think very much of myself. Before I fell disabled, I was a graduate student and studying political philosophy, and I wanted to be a priest. I heard the call to be a priest actually about a year before I fell disabled. So I really try to think of myself as a conduit for universal norms that are larger than myself. And so that's really, I think, how I try to approach everything. How can I create a universal law that everyone could follow at all times? And why I bring this up is that I don't get emotional very often because I like the fight. I'm energized by the fight. There's nothing I like more than thwarting nefarious malfeasance and looking it right in the eye and seeing through it. And what I do get emotional about is the victories, even if they're little victories. And I actually shed a little bit of a tear earlier today because during the meeting, right after the vote to instruct the executive director to reissue his guidance on ownership requirements, I got to say to someone who I saw, and it was Amanique, fight to make that change happen. I got to say to her that she changed the world, and that is the best feeling in the world, because these people, these corporate interests, they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars hiring corporate strategy firms and lobbyists and lawyers, but the power of a good idea can beat them. And it won't always beat them, and you're going to take some knocks and you'll probably lose more battles than you win. But that feeling of a good idea beating these entrenched structural corporate interests and their straw man owners and their nonsensical arguments, looking it in the face and beating it, that feeling is empowering. And it's an honor for me to be able to stand alongside people who have made that kind of change. And it's what I like so much about this activism, because I don't just get to do it once. I get to meet all these people who are fighting their individual battles, and I get to help them along the way. And I get to see them go through the process and learn and grow and take those lessons into the business environment as well, and become the kind of industry leaders that aren't going to try to engage in regulatory capture or try to engage in lawmaking that tries to bring back the war on drugs through things like 4168, which was a task force bill that we defeated and sent back for further study. And those are the moments that mean the world to me. And I've only cried twice over the past 12 months. Once was on August 6th, when I lost my friend, Robin Hansen, who lived in Sweden and sadly passed away. And then the other time was today, when I got to say to Amanique that she changed the world. And I'm very grateful and humbled to be in this position and to be able to share. And I'm sorry for getting a little overwhelmed. I try to retain my composure, but this was a very big day.
Yeah, I got to thank you, Grant, because, having a voice to, or someone to just reach out to when, say, for instance, I'm in disbelief about a particular regulation or city ordinance or something like that, I can call Grant and say, "Hey, Grant, what do you think of this?" Because I can't process it right now. No, I lack the ability to do it right now. I can definitely call on you, and you'll give me far more information. I come away wiser than I could have had I sat there and try to Google my way through it. And I appreciate you. Several others appreciate you. I can't even name them all right now, but you are greatly appreciated in this space, in this community.
I've had times like that too, and I think I should probably not say so much within the commission publicly, but when I've been watching Boston and Cambridge and Uxbridge even, I was privy to people that thought that would never happen. And it reminds me of like 20 years ago when people would say that legalization was never going to happen. It's that same kind of smugness and that same kind of like, you don't know how the world really works, kind of unpleasant confidence that you get from people who are used to getting whatever they want. And it doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, particularly the way that it's happened in municipalities that people have really fought in, it's very satisfying. You can make a lot of change at the local level in particular if you are willing to really like threaten to replace people, you know, and then they feel that fear. Yeah, and I mean, I can say it happens at the commission too, and it's fun to watch that as well because you shouldn't be making us feel uncomfortable. You know, that's the whole point of being a public servant is like remembering who you work for. And I think that we're new enough, and we are the individuals that were selected to be on the commission are not people who are like entrenched in the political world. So we're more open to taking that kind of input and really like feeling that discomfort and openly reacting to it. And it is very fun to watch people who thought that they would win no matter what, not win.
And so, out of curiosity, is there any way we could ever find out who those three grandfather guys are in? Who they are? Like those?
Oh, I mean that should be public information. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, if you want to like send me an email, I can make it go through the process. But that's public information.
Yeah, because you know we live off of conspiracy over here. You know, so not casting any aspersion or any you know. Anyway, I'm gonna shut my.
I don't have any reason to believe that those three entities were involved in anything that they shouldn't have been, but that's the whole point of public information is you take it and you do whatever you want with it.
Of course. And so you know, I wanted to float an idea down. Is there possible there could be like a Bill of Rights or a Constitution to so that we have some as economic empowerment applicants we have some stability, we have some certainty knowing that our licenses or our processing of our license will move in a certain way, you know. And so you know we feel definitely under attack. We felt under attack. We felt marginalized. We felt you know that it has been different. I know that the commission, particularly yourself, have made yourself available to hear it. You know, but I think that with everything going on in the world, all the history, you know, and the municipal, you know, indifference, all those things make us feel unheard, you know, and to have like a Bill of Rights, you know, certain things that we know that are inalienable, that will not change, you know, going forward. Maybe that is something that could be proposed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a question for you, not for me. I think that it would be the most powerful if economic empowerment applicants or whatever broader group, but I do think certified economic empowerment applicants in particular, if they were to organize and represent themselves with one voice and have a Bill of Rights or something similar, I think that would be really powerful. Right now, there are a lot of different groups that represent themselves as representing those groups, but usually they're made up of both certified applicants and then also just kind of activists or whoever who advocates, that's what I was looking for, or whoever who aren't necessarily affected by the policy. And I think if we had a group where it was clear that these are the people who are affected by the policy and are speaking with a voice that is organized, that would be a lot of power because now we're just trying to talk to people individually, like as we did this week, which was powerful too. But I mean, if you were organized and you had a Bill of Rights, nobody could question that.
It's tough to get organized with this group. It's herding cats, man, herding cats.
I know.
But,
I'm glad to be so powerful.
Well, I guess that's it for my questions. I wish I could see the comments. What's in the comments box?
Oh, nothing interesting. You don't need to worry about it. Don't worry. It's been very cool and pleasant.
No dissent? No one's cursing at me yet?
Just one,
I've been getting some texts this morning.
No, just one, Chauncy. I'm sure you know. I'm guessing you probably know your short list of people that might be in the comments.
You can probably leave it at that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think what it really comes down to is exactly what we're saying, is just that they're, to Shaleen's point, that ideally there's somebody or even a few folks that can sort of step up and be those main voices of representation for EE applicants, because it's tough, I think. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing some in the comments, is just sometimes there's conflicts, there's folks that are speaking up and they're fighting for certain stuff. It doesn't always mean they're fighting for everything. And so, it's I guess that's just the interesting road when it comes to activism, is that, there's just, there's a lot of different folks that have differing needs out there, and it isn't always easy to sort of help all of them, right? So, and certainly with I think with the pandemic, it makes it, I don't know if it makes it more difficult, but certainly, I think folks do love gathering in person for stuff. It feels like a lot of times those rallies are a lot more effective when we're all in person, and who knows how those are going to be affected in the long run, but hopefully at some point we're all sort of able at least to get out in public and maybe even do responsibly, socially safe distance rallies or something. Because I think we need those. I kind of miss going to them, Chauncy. I kind of miss seeing you and Grant at places and going out and doing our thing.
And we can do it.
Hell no.
I'm ready for it any day, anytime. I'll get out there.
One thing that might be worth noting is about lobbying. It's a really interesting situation here because the big companies don't have the lobbying power that they do in other industries. You can see from the shutdown right now and the excessive HCA fees and a lot of things that big companies are lobbying for too. We're not seeing, those things play out. And it's, in fact, in my experience, small businesses that are more effective at lobbying. I don't think that's going to necessarily last very long, but we should take advantage of it while we have it, that situation in Massachusetts. I think the lobbying trainings that have been done that have attended have been excellent. I think when people lobbying me, as they did for this change that we had today, they've been very effective. But I mention it now because one good thing maybe about this whole shutdown that we're in is public officials are just home spending more time, in front of their computer than I think they otherwise normally would be. And so I think if you are writing people or you are calling, it's a very effective time to do it. And of course, anger comes, that's part of being a public official, is you have signed up to take that anger, when it's not about you personally, it's about the position that you hold. So I definitely take that in stride. But in general, the lobbying by small businesses and by these communities that we're talking about has been incredibly effective. And I think now more effective than ever. So I really encourage people to lobby now while they can.
One insight there, which is my favorite phrase in the English language: without question, as much as I might dislike corporate malfeasance, what's good for the goose is good for the gander in some circumstances.
Well, and so with that, is there anything? I know we've had a great conversation today. Is there anything that we've sort of haven't touched upon that deserves? And I get it. That, we could probably go on indefinitely about different issues around different stuff. But when it comes to sort of EE applicants and today's meeting and just some of the issues that had surfaced, have we covered anything, or have we missed anything?
We covered a lot, but one thing I'd specifically like to point to is that in order for delivery to move forward, municipalities will have to allow those businesses to locate there, and they'll have to have HCAs. So the fact that residents now are going to want delivery for health and safety reasons, even more than just convenience, I think is a powerful point. So I would really encourage people to get 5 or 10 people in your municipality together and work to make sure that delivery businesses are allowed in your community.
One important issue, that is absolutely important, and Shaleen and so many others deserve credit, because today the commission actually voted to go forward with a pre-certification process that won't take away all those hurdles for delivery applicants, but is going to change the game, I think, in a lot of ways. So definitely keep an eye out for implementation of that. I actually think an email just came from the Cannabis Control Commission about what happened today. So, and what I was going to leave folks with is, so what's fun about this activism industry, if you're doing it in the grassroots, is it's always on to the next thing. And so the next thing that I'm going to be taking up the fight on is dating back to 2012. There has been no social equity or economic empowerment structure for licensing of medical cannabis operations. Now, from 2012 until now, those licenses had to be vertically integrated, which is to say you had to cultivate, manufacture, produce, and retail all under the same license. But they're going to be potentially broken up. Bill just passed favorably out of committee a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. The days all blend together at this point. And that bill would break up medical licensing. And what I'm pushing for is to ensure that those licenses for a period of 2 to 5 years after they get deverticalized are only given to economic empowerment, social equity, and other disadvantaged applicants, because I think all the work in the adult use market is amazing and it has to continue, but we can't forget about equity in medical cannabis licensing, and I'll make sure that it stays in the forefront of the discussion.
Awesome. I like the sound of that.
Well, great, guys. We really appreciate everyone taking time. I know, everyone sort of needed to be flexible with the marathon meeting this morning. So really thank you, Shaleen Title, Grant Smith, and Chauncy Spenser for joining us. I know the conversation was really valuable. I know a lot of the folks that were listening really appreciated hearing our conversation. And so thanks very much. We appreciate it. And hopefully we can all come back again and do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Anytime. Anytime.
Good to see you guys.
Great talking to you guys again.
Good to see all you guys.
Nice to be with you.
Yeah, good to see all of you too. Thank you, guys.
You guys have a great one.
We'll talk soon.
Bye now.
All right.
All right. Well, 2 shows in one day, but I think that was totally worth it. We want to thank all of you for joining us in the afternoon. I know you're not used to us coming on like that, but thank you for joining us, and thanks for commenting. Thanks for taking part in the conversation. And I don't know, you got anything to? There's that one. Yeah.